I thought he wanted to help me. But instead, he stole my multi-million-dollar idea and presented it as his own, then fired me a week before the launch. He thought he'd gotten away with it. He didn't know that I was the only person who knew about the single, critical flaw I had secretly built into the system, a flaw that was set to detonate in front of the CEO and the entire company. My name is Leo, and I'm a 35-year-old software architect. For most of my career, I've been something of a digital craftsman, the guy who designs and builds the elegant, complex code that makes innovative systems purr. I preferred the quiet hum of a server room to the harsh glare of a spotlight. My passion is crafting technology that works flawlessly, optimizing every byte for peak performance. This dedication to precision, this very core of my professional being, is what my toxic manager, a man named Victor Stan, decided to exploit, twist, and ultimately use to try and end my career. He would come to deeply regret that decision. I'd been at the tech firm, Innovate Dynamics, for 6 years. It was, for a long time, an ideal environment. The culture encouraged genuine creativity, giving developers the freedom to explore complex challenges. For 5 of those years, I worked under a fantastic director named Anya, who trusted her team, fostered autonomy, and understood that true innovation blooms from a place of respect. But Anya retired, opting for a quieter life of sailing, and Victor was brought in to replace her. Victor was the quintessential corporate predator. He had a different, perfectly tailored suit for every day of the week, a smile that never quite reached his shrewd, calculating eyes, and a bewildering talent for speaking in abstract business jargon that sounded profound to the executives on the top floor, but was utterly meaningless to the engineers who built the actual products. He wasn't a builder, he was a talker. He was a micromanager of the highest order. He'd hover over your shoulder, questioning every line of code as if he understood it. He'd schedule endless circular meetings where he would pontificate about synergy and disruptive innovation, while we all silently wished for a fire drill. But his most insidious trait was his pathological need to take credit for other people's work. If a junior developer on my team discovered a clever bug fix, Victor would present it in the weekly leadership briefing as something I personally implemented over the weekend. He was a credit thief, a corporate plagiarist, who was building his career on the foundation of our collective talent and ingenuity. His ambition was boundless, his ethics non-existent. For 2 years, I endured him. I kept my head down, focusing on my tasks, hoping he would either get promoted out or simply tire of our department. Then came Project Nexus. Nexus was more than just a project. It was my brainchild, an idea I had been developing in my personal time for years. It was a groundbreaking new logistics management platform that leveraged advanced predictive AI to not just streamline supply chains, but to anticipate disruptions before they even occurred. It was a potential industry game changer, the kind of innovation that could redefine our company and put us years ahead of the competition. It was the future. I made the pivotal mistake of mentioning the core concept to Victor in a private one-on-one meeting. His eyes, usually glazed with corporate speak, lit up with a dangerous, predatory glint. "This is phenomenal, Leo," he said, his voice unusually smooth, dripping with false enthusiasm. "Truly visionary. Flesh it out. Put together a full proposal. Develop a proof of concept. This is exactly the kind of disruptive thinking I've been trying to cultivate in this department." He made it sound like he had inspired me. Like an absolute fool, I poured myself into it. I spent the next month working nights and weekends, sacrificing sleep and personal time, sculpting a detailed proposal complete with a functional, elegant proof of concept prototype. I built a system so robust, so efficient, that it was practically a work of digital art. I presented it to Victor in his expansive office, his gaze fixed intently on the screen. He watched my entire presentation, a hungry, assessing look on his face, asking intelligent, probing questions that, in hindsight, I now realize were him mentally mining me for every key detail, every nuance of my design. "Leo, Leave all this with me, he said, tapping the printed proposal with an expensive pen. I need to socialize this with the senior leadership. Get some initial buy-in. You've done truly exceptional work here. Truly exceptional. He nodded slowly, a picture of corporate approval. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected calendar invitation. It was for a company-wide town hall meeting, scheduled for the following Monday. The subject line read, Project Nexus, our next bold leap into the future of logistics. My heart swelled with a cautious sense of pride and anticipation. This was it, my concept. My moment, finally. I walked into the main auditorium, expecting to find a seat in the front, ready to be called up to the stage. But then, the house lights dimmed, and Victor Stan strode confidently onto the stage, a sickeningly smug grin plastered across his face. He stood at the podium, and behind him, on the giant screen, was the first slide of my presentation, the exact one I had given him. He proceeded to present Project Nexus, my baby, my intellectual property, as his own creation. He used my words, my data, my prototype screenshots, all practically compiled. He talked about the late nights he spent and the moment of inspiration he had that led to this breakthrough. He didn't mention my name, not once, not a single acknowledgement. I sat there in the vast, darkened auditorium, frozen. I couldn't feel my body, and my stomach rumbled in utter disgust. It was the most brazen act of intellectual theft I had ever witnessed. My coworkers from the development team were looking at me, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and suppressed anger. They knew. We all knew. But in the corporate world, the person with the microphone is often the one who dictates the narrative. At the end of his grand presentation, the auditorium erupted in applause. Mr. Covington, the CEO, stood up and shook Victor's hand vigorously, patting him on the back. This is the kind of vision that will define our future, Victor, he said out loud, his voice resonating with admiration. Truly game-changing work. That was the day I knew I had to leave Innovate Dynamics. But I wasn't just going to quietly walk away. Victor had stolen my work, my passion, my future, and I was going to make sure he choked on every single bite of it. Project Nexus was immediately greenlit, with a massive budget and a seemingly impossible 6-month deadline. Victor, now the celebrated visionary, was put in charge. And in a move of pure arrogant cruelty, he made me the lead architect. Leo, he'd said, with a condescending smirk in our first team meeting after the announcement. You've got the best grasp of my vision. I'll handle the high-level strategy. You just make sure the technical execution is flawless. No pressure. For the next 6 months, I worked like a man possessed, driven by a simmering, controlled fury. I put in 80-hour weeks. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I pushed my team hard, but I was always in the trenches with them, solving every problem, architecting every module, optimizing every function. I was going to build the most incredible, most robust, most perfect system this company had ever seen. But I was also going to build a secret, a single, tiny, elegant little time bomb, hidden deep in the core of the system's architecture. This was my pro-revenge. It wasn't a virus or a destructive piece of malware. It was a logic fork, a piece of conditional code so deeply embedded within the primary data validation and user authentication modules that no one but its creator, me, would ever find it. The system would pass every quality assurance test, every stress test, every security audit with flying colors. It was designed to lie dormant, completely invisible, until a very specific and unusual set of conditions was met. The trigger was tied to the final, system-wide go-live command, initiated from the master administrative terminal, the terminal that would be used on stage during the official launch event. When that precise command was executed, the logic fork would awaken. It would perform 2 functions. First, it would trigger a deep, recursive data integrity check across all modules. Second, and crucially, it would cross-reference the project's internal metadata, a field I had buried and encrypted on day 1. listing me as the sole original creator, with the company's current HR database to verify the identity of the user initiating the go-live command. If the user initiating the go-live command was not the same user listed in the metadata as the project's original creator, the system would conclude a fatal integrity mismatch had occurred, and it would execute its core failsafe protocol to prevent the deployment of what it perceived as potentially corrupted or unauthorized data. It would instantaneously and irrevocably purge every line of code, every associated database, every configuration file from the deployment servers. It would, in effect, delete itself, a clean, silent self-annihilation, leaving behind only the simple error message I had designed. As we got closer to the launch date, Victor became even more insufferable. He was a media darling within the company, featured prominently in the internal newsletter, praised in every executive meeting. He held daily status update meetings where we, the actual engineers, would have to explain our progress, while he scrolled through his phone, barely feigning interest. He treated me and my team like his personal foot soldiers, disposable and interchangeable. Then, precisely 1 week before the official launch, he called me into his office. He had that predatory, self-satisfied smile on his face. "Leo," he said, leaning back in his expensive leather chair, his hands clasped behind his head. "We're making some strategic personnel adjustments as we transition into the next phase of Innovate Dynamics. Unfortunately, your role has been made redundant. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." I just stared at him, my mind strangely calm. He was firing me, after I had just spent 6 months of my life building his golden ticket, his path to the executive suite. He was firing me so he wouldn't have to share even a sliver of the spotlight. The ultimate betrayal. "My role is redundant?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm, barely above a whisper. "I'm the lead architect of Project Nexus, the biggest innovation this company has ever launched. Without me, there is no Project Nexus. And we appreciate your contributions, Leo," he said, his voice slick and devoid of sincerity. "But your work is done. The heavy lifting is over. We'll handle it from here. Security will escort you out. Please have your personal belongings packed within the hour. Your final paycheck and severance details will be mailed to you." It was the final arrogant mistake of a man who believed he was utterly untouchable. He didn't realize that by firing me, he was removing the one and only person on the planet who could defuse the bomb. He was sealing his own fate. The next week was an agonizing wait. I was at home, officially locked out of the system I had painstakingly built, watching my former teammates post excited, proud messages in our private chat group about the upcoming launch. They were genuinely good people, and I felt a pang of genuine guilt that they were about to be caught in the blast radius of Victor's downfall. But this was bigger than them. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming what was stolen. The day of the launch arrived. It was a massive company event, broadcast live to all our global offices. I sat in my home office, watching the live stream on my laptop, a strange mix of apprehension and grim satisfaction churning within me. The auditorium was packed to capacity. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The CEO, Mr. Covington, came on stage and gave a glowing introduction, speaking eloquently about innovation and the future, before introducing the visionary mind behind Project Nexus, Victor Thorne. Victor walked like a king who just won a war without even fighting, onto the stage, to a thunderous applause, absolutely basking in the glory. He looked like a king ascending his throne, his tailored suit gleaming under the stage lights. He delivered a slick, polished speech, full of abstract buzzwords and false humility. He talked endlessly about his team and the challenges he overcame to bring this project to fruition. Then, with a practiced flourish, he walked over to a high-tech terminal set up on a podium at the center of the stage. "And now," he announced, his voice booming with confidence, "I'd like to give you all a glimpse of the future. With the press of this button, Project Nexus will officially go live, and a new era for Innovate Dynamics will begin." He hovered his hand over the keyboard for a dramatic pause, soaking in the collective anticipation. He looked out at the massive crowd, at Mr. Covington in the front row, and he smiled. A self-congratulatory, triumphant smile. He pressed the enter key. The first instance of hidden shock that went through him was when, for a couple of seconds, the project didn't start. The main screen behind him still showed the glossy Project Nexus logo. I could see a flicker of confusion, a subtle tightening around Victor's eyes. He discreetly, almost imperceptibly, pressed the key again. And then it happened. The logo on the screen vanished. It was replaced by a single line of stark white text on a black background. It was the failsafe protocol's final output message, a message I had written 6 months ago, knowing this moment might come. It read, "Fatal integrity mismatch. Project creator metadata does not match deployment user. Project has been purged to prevent corruption." A wave of confused murmuring rippled through the auditorium, growing louder with each passing second. Victor was frantically typing on the keyboard, his face rapidly turning from confused to panicked to a sickening ashen white. The technicians in the wings were scrambling, speaking urgently into their headsets, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and alarm. Mr. Covington, the CEO, had stood up, his face a thundercloud of confusion, then dawning realization, then absolute, incandescent rage. Victor knew. He had no idea what had happened, what code had just betrayed him, but he knew. The multi-million-dollar project he had claimed as his own, his path to power, had just, in front of the entire company and its global audience, vanished into thin air. He stood there, frozen in the harsh glare of the spotlight, a fraud exposed, his career evaporating in real time before thousands of eyes. The fallout was even more spectacular than I could have ever imagined. The company had to issue a humiliating press release announcing the indefinite delay of their flagship project, a devastating blow to their stock price and market credibility. Victor was not just fired, he was publicly humiliated. The subsequent internal investigation quickly revealed his brazen intellectual theft. Several of my former teammates, when questioned by HR and legal, told the whole truth. That Nexus was my project, that Victor had stolen it, and that he had fired me a week before the launch, presumably to erase any connection. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Mr. Covington's personal assistant. He wanted to see me. I walked back into the imposing building I had been unceremoniously escorted out of just a week prior. I sat in the CEO's sprawling office, the same office Victor had so desperately coveted. Mr. Covington offered me my job back, a significant promotion to Director of Innovation, a massive raise, and a sincere, public apology from him personally. He then asked me, almost pleadingly, if I could rebuild Nexus. I told him I would think about it. I had the original source code, of course, safely backed up and encrypted on a personal drive. I could rebuild it, make it even better. But I didn't know if I wanted to. The sweet taste of revenge was still on my tongue. My toxic boss had been exposed, his career ruined by his own hubris and greed. He stole my work, and in the end, it was the one thing that guaranteed his spectacular downfall. He thought he was firing a redundant employee. He didn't realize he was arming the bomb and walking away from the one man who knew how to disarm it.